The jungle on Guadalcanal doesn't just hide the enemy. It is the enemy. It's a suffocating green wall where every shadow can kill. A single crack from the trees and another friend is gone. Your M1 Garand feels useless against ghosts you can't see. Then you notice the new lieutenant. He's assembling a rifle his superiors call a toy, a polished Winchester with a long, gleaming scope. He stares into the canopy, not with fear, but with the cold patience of a hunter. He's not looking for soldiers. He's looking for other hunters. This was the brutal reality that greeted the men of the 132nd Infantry Regiment when they landed in December of 1942. They were cogs in a vast military machine trained for a war of overwhelming firepower and rapid advance. But Guadalcanal cared little for doctrine forged on open fields. Here, the war was vertical, fought against an enemy who seemed to melt into the canopy, masters of concealment and psychological terror. The standard issue M1 Garand, a masterpiece of engineering that had given the American soldier an unparalleled advantage in volume of fire, felt clumsy and loud in this green hell. Its powerful 8-round clip was designed to suppress and overwhelm, but you couldn't suppress what you couldn't see. The enemy was a whisper, a phantom, and their weapon of choice was the Arisaka rifle, often fitted with a scope. It was a war of nerves, and the Americans were losing. Into this suffocating environment stepped Second Lieutenant John George. He was not the archetype of a frontline officer. Before the war, his battlefields had been the meticulously manicured shooting ranges of the Midwest. As the Illinois state champion marksman, his world was one of controlled breathing, slow squeezing triggers, and the art of placing a single projectile exactly where he intended. He understood a different kind of warfare, one measured not in rounds per minute, but in the silent, patient calculus of ballistics. And he had brought a piece of that world with him. It was a Winchester Model 70, a bolt-action sporting rifle he had purchased with his own money. It was a thing of beauty, with a polished walnut stock and finely machined steel, a stark contrast to the Parkerized, mass-produced weapons of war surrounding it. Mounted atop it was a state-of-the-art Lyman Alaskan scope, a long tube of gleaming brass and precision glass. To the hardened infantryman and his own company commander, Captain Morris, the weapon was an absurdity. They saw a hunting rifle, something for taking down deer in a peaceful forest, not for fighting the soldiers of Imperial Japan. It was slow to fire, its bolt-action mechanism a throwback to a previous generation of warfare. They called it a toy, a pawn-shop rifle, a curiosity that had no place in the grim business of jungle combat. The skepticism was understandable. The doctrine of the day was built around the rifle squad, a unit designed to lay down a wall of lead. What use was one slow, precise shot against a banzai charge or a hidden machine gun nest? To them, George's rifle was a symbol of individualism in a conflict that demanded collective action. But they misunderstood the man and his weapon. They saw a piece of sporting equipment. George saw a surgical instrument. He knew that in this new kind of fight, the psychological impact of one perfectly aimed shot could be worth more than 100 fired in panic. While his men scanned the jungle with iron sights, looking for the glint of a helmet or the shape of a uniform, George looked for something different. He searched for a sniper's hide, the subtle disturbance in the leaves, the unnatural shadow that betrayed a human presence. He wasn't just another soldier. He was a specialist in a war that hadn't yet realized it needed one. As the casualties mounted, particularly in the contested sector around a place called Point Cruz, The limitations of conventional tactics were becoming tragically clear. An unseen force was bleeding them, one man at a time, and the Army's mighty arsenal had no answer. The stage was being set for a duel, not between armies, but between two opposing philosophies of war, and the toy rifle was about to become the centerpiece of the drama. By January of 1943, the area around Point Cruz had devolved into a killing ground. It was no longer a conventional front line, but a deadly, invisible web spun by a small, highly effective group of Japanese snipers. These were not simply soldiers who could shoot well. They were practitioners of a unique and terrifying doctrine. They would climb high into the banyan trees, sometimes lashing themselves to the branches, prepared to remain in their perch for days. From these elevated positions, they commanded a panoramic view of the American lines, able to track movement, identify leaders, and sow chaos with chilling precision. The psychological toll was immense. Every trip to the latrine, every delivery of rations, every movement between foxholes became a life-or-death gamble. Men were shot while reading letters from home, while cleaning their weapons, while sharing a cigarette. The crack of the Arisaka rifle became the soundtrack to a slow, grinding attrition that was eating away at the morale of the entire regiment. Standard American tactics proved utterly futile. Patrols sent to hunt the snipers would walk directly into their kill zones, losing men before they could even identify the source of the fire. Mortar barrages were useless. The jungle canopy was so thick that shells often detonated harmlessly in the branches, and even if they didn't, the snipers were too dispersed to be targeted effectively. The Garans, with their iron sights, were outmatched. The Japanese marksmen were often firing from ranges of several hundred yards, far beyond the effective sight picture of a standard infantryman trying to pinpoint a target in a dense, shifting curtain of green. The Japanese had turned the jungle itself into a weapon, and the Americans were fighting the landscape as much as the enemy. The breaking point came on January 22nd. The daily casualty reports laid on the desk of Colonel Ferry, the regimental commander, told a grim story. The advance had stalled, and the initiative was being lost, not to a major enemy offensive, but to a handful of exceptionally skilled individuals. It was a tactical problem that firepower alone could not solve. It required a different kind of weapon and a different kind of soldier. The whispers about Lieutenant George and his strange, beautiful rifle had reached the command post. What had been an object of ridicule was now being discussed as a potential, albeit unorthodox, solution. Captain Morris, who had once dismissed the Winchester as a toy, now found himself in the difficult position of recommending its use. Desperation had a way of making men open-minded. Colonel Ferry summoned the young lieutenant. This was not a general order shouted to a platoon, but a quiet, intense briefing. Intelligence, pieced together from fleeting sightings and the trajectories of fatal shots, suggested they were facing not one or two, but a coordinated team of 11 snipers. They were methodical, patient, and they had turned a critical sector of the American line into their personal hunting preserve. The mission given to John George was as simple as it was terrifying. Eliminate them all. He was not being sent with the squad for support or a fire team for suppression. He was being sent alone, armed with his personal property, to engage in a series of deadly duels. He was to enter the sniper's world, to think like them, to see the jungle through their eyes, and to beat them at their own game. As George cleaned his Winchester Model 70 that evening, the weight of the task must have been immense. He was being asked to prove, under the most extreme pressure imaginable, that the principles of marksmanship he had mastered in peacetime could be translated into the brutal language of war. For the next 4 days, his life and the lives of his comrades would depend entirely on the clarity of his Lyman Alaskan scope and the steadiness of his hand. The hunt was on. On the morning of January 22nd, John George slipped into the jungle alone. The air was thick and wet, a blanket of humidity that muffled sound and clung to the skin. For the soldiers in the foxholes he passed, the jungle was a place of fear, an undifferentiated mass of green danger. But for George, it was a complex tapestry of light and shadow, a tactical map to be read. He moved with a hunter's economy of motion, his eyes constantly scanning, not the ground ahead, but the canopy above. He wasn't looking for a man, he was looking for a lair. The Japanese snipers were masters of camouflage, but they could not defy the laws of physics. To fire a rifle, they needed a clear line of sight. To survive for days in a tree, they needed a stable platform. These necessities created subtle anomalies in the natural chaos of the jungle. A freshly cut branch, a patch of vines tied back unnaturally, a dark shape that didn't sway with the breeze. It was these details that his trained eyes, aided by the powerful magnification of his Lyman Alaskan scope, were designed to catch. The first engagement was a duel of infinite patience. George found a position that offered both concealment and a commanding view of a known kill zone. He didn't move for hours. He became part of the landscape, his mind focused, his breathing controlled. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement high in a banyan tree, a silhouette shifting against the light. Through his scope, the image was startlingly clear. He could see the sniper, lashed to a branch, scanning the American lines. The enemy soldier felt safe in his perch, confident in his concealment. He was the predator. But now, for the first time, he was also the prey. George settled the crosshairs, controlled his breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the Winchester was sharp, distinct from the heavier boom of the Garands. In the canopy, a shape slumped and fell, one down. But the enemy were clever. They adapted. They began using decoys, classic sniper tricks, designed to draw fire and reveal an opponent's position. George soon spotted what looked like an obvious target, a helmet covered in leaves, poking out from a dense cluster of ferns. A nervous or untrained soldier would have fired immediately. George waited. He studied the helmet through his scope for long minutes. Something was wrong. The position was too perfect, too textbook. He scanned the area around the decoy, tracing lines of sight, considering every possible firing position that could cover that spot. And then he found it. 30 yards to the right and 10 feet higher, hidden in a darker shadow, was the real sniper. The decoy was bait, and George's patience had allowed him to see the trap and the trapper. Another single, precise shot echoed through the trees. 2 down. This became the pattern over the next 4 days. It was a deadly, methodical chess match played out across the jungle canopy. George used his superior optics to his full advantage. The Lyman Alaskan scope provided a bright, clear image that was far superior to the standard issue, Japanese Type 98 scopes, allowing him to see details and distinguish targets in the deep shadows where the enemy felt most secure. He learned to identify their habits, their preferred trees, their fields of fire, and their fatal mistake of sometimes firing from the same position twice. He was not just a marksman, he was a profiler, deconstructing the enemy's tactics one shot at a time. The men in the foxholes began to listen for the unique report of his Winchester. It was a sound that had once been a curiosity, but had now become a symbol of hope, a sign that the invisible terror in the trees was, at last, being vanquished. Each crack of his rifle meant another ghost had been laid to rest. The legend of the lieutenant with the toy rifle was being written in gunpowder and blood. By the end of the fourth day, January 25th, the jungle around Point Cruz had fallen silent. The incessant, nerve-shredding crack of the Arasaka sniper rifles was gone. John George returned to the American lines, his mission complete. He had engaged and eliminated all 11 designated targets. He had done it alone, using his privately owned rifle, and had not suffered a single wound. The effect on the morale of the 132nd Infantry was immediate and profound. The invisible threat that had bled them for weeks had been systematically dismantled by one man. Men could once again move with a degree of confidence, the suffocating paranoia lifting like the morning mist. For Colonel Ferry, this was more than just a successful mission. It was a revelation. George's extraordinary performance was a stark, undeniable proof of concept. It demonstrated that in the specific, brutal terrain of jungle warfare, a single, highly trained marksman equipped with a precision, scoped rifle could have a strategic impact far outweighing that of an entire rifle squad. The toy rifle had proven its worth in the most conclusive way possible. The skepticism that had once surrounded Lieutenant George and his Winchester evaporated. It was replaced by respect, awe, and a burning question in the mind of the regimental command. Can this be replicated? Colonel Ferry recognized that while George's individual skill was exceptional, the principle behind his success was not. A combination of patient marksmanship, superior optics, and tactical acumen was a formula that could and should be integrated into their doctrine. He was not content to have just one specialist. He wanted a force of them. Ferry summoned George once more. This time the orders were not to hunt, but to build. The colonel tasked him with creating the regiment's first-ever formal sniper section. George was to handpick the best shots from across the regiment, men who displayed the same natural aptitude for marksmanship and the same cool-headed temperament that he possessed. This was a monumental shift in thinking for the U.S. Army at the time. The concept of a dedicated sniper was still in its infancy, often viewed with suspicion and seen as something outside the conventional order of battle. But the grim realities of Guadalcanal had forced a practical evolution. The second part of George's new mission was to equip this new unit. His own Winchester, a civilian rifle, was a one-off solution. An entire section would need military-grade equipment. The regimental ordnance officers were now tasked with a problem they had never before faced: sourcing dedicated sniper rifles. They scoured their armories and found a number of Springfield rifles, the bolt-action predecessor to the Garand, which were known for their superb accuracy. These were then paired with the best optics they could acquire, powerful, high-quality Unertl scopes, renowned for their precision. The result was a set of purpose-built sniper systems, the very tools that a few weeks earlier would have been dismissed as unnecessary luxuries. John George, the quiet marksman who had been an outlier, was now an instructor and a pioneer. He began training his hand-picked soldiers, not just in the art of shooting, but in the craft of the sniper: camouflage, stalking, observation, and the patient, deadly psychology of the hunt. He was passing on the hard-won lessons of his 4-day duel, transforming his personal victory into a lasting capability for the entire regiment. An army that had entered the jungle with a doctrine of massed firepower was now, out of necessity, learning the profound power of a single, well-placed shot. The legacy of Point Cruz would not just be 11 fallen enemy snipers, but the birth of a new kind of American warrior. Having forged a new tactical doctrine in the crucible of Guadalcanal, John George might have expected to continue his war in the Pacific. But the global conflict had a logic of its own, a relentless demand for specialized skills in new and unexpected theaters. A call went out for volunteers for a secret, high-risk mission deep behind enemy lines in another corner of the world. The unit was designated the 5,307th Composite Unit, a bland, bureaucratic name that deliberately concealed its deadly purpose. They would soon be known to the world by a much more evocative name, Merrill's Marauders. The mission was audacious. 3,000 American volunteers would march on foot through hundreds of miles of the world's most inhospitable jungle and mountain terrain in northern Burma. Their objective was to outflank the elite Japanese 18th Division, disrupt their supply lines, and seize the critical airfield at Myitkyina. It was a long-range penetration operation, meaning they would be cut off from conventional support for months, supplied only by airdrops. For a man like John George, whose skills had been proven in the most demanding conditions, the challenge was irresistible. He volunteered and was accepted into this new and legendary unit. He brought his trusted Winchester Model 70 with him, though he made a crucial modification. Believing the long, heavy Lyman Alaskan scope might be a liability on a grueling march where every ounce mattered, he replaced it with a lighter, more compact Weaver 330 scope. It was a practical decision, a nod to the different tactical realities he expected to face. The Burma campaign, which began in February of 1944, was a different kind of war from Guadalcanal. The Marauders were not defending a fixed line. They were constantly on the move, a spearhead of flesh and blood thrust deep into enemy territory. The nature of the combat was fluid and chaotic. Engagements were often sudden, brutal ambushes at close quarters. A Japanese patrol would appear without warning on a narrow jungle trail, and the fighting would be over in a ferocious flurry of automatic fire and grenades. In this environment, the slow, deliberate methodology of a sniper had less utility. There was rarely time to find a concealed position, calculate range, and deliver a single, perfect shot. The premium was on rapid, reactive firepower. The M1 Garand and even the Thompson submachine gun became the decisive weapons. George's Winchester, the instrument that had dominated the treetops of Guadalcanal, was less suited to the lightning-fast firefights of the Burma Trail. This highlights a critical lesson of warfare. The perfect weapon for one battlefield can be a hindrance on another. The tactical environment dictates the tool. The value of a sniper is highest in a static or slow-moving conflict, where observation and long-range interdiction can shape the battlefield. In a war of constant movement and surprise contact, volume of fire often becomes paramount. George found himself fighting more as a standard infantry officer than as a specialist marksman. He led his men, fought in ambushes, and endured the same hellish conditions as every other marauder: relentless marches, tropical diseases like malaria and typhus, and the constant mental strain of operating deep in enemy territory. His journey with Merrill's Marauders was a testament to his adaptability as a soldier, proving he was more than just a marksman. He was a leader who could fight and survive in one of the most brutal campaigns of the entire war. The Winchester, while used less frequently, remained his constant companion, a symbol of the unique path that had led him from the ranges of Illinois to the deepest, darkest jungles of Southeast Asia. The campaign with Merrill's Marauders was a crucible that tested the limits of human endurance. Over 5 months, they marched nearly 1,000 miles, fought in 5 major engagements and 32 skirmishes with the battle-hardened veterans of the Japanese 18th Division. They accomplished their mission, culminating in the capture of the Myitkyina airfield, but the cost was staggering. Of the nearly 3,000 Marauders who entered Burma, only about 200 were still considered combat effective by the end of the campaign. The rest were killed, wounded, or evacuated with debilitating diseases. John George was one of the survivors. He had witnessed a different facet of the war, a brutal close-quarters struggle, where survival often depended more on luck and raw tenacity than on precision marksmanship. His experience in Burma added a vital new layer to his understanding of combat. He had seen the strengths and limitations of his own specialized skills and had gained a profound appreciation for the sheer grit of the ordinary infantryman. When the war finally ended, George returned to a world eager to forget the conflict. But he knew that the lessons learned in the jungles of Guadalcanal and Burma, paid for in blood, were too valuable to be lost. He was not just a soldier, he was a student of war, a meticulous observer who had kept detailed notes and analyzed his experiences with a technician's eye. He felt a duty to preserve this knowledge. In 1947, he published a book that would become a classic of military literature, Shots Fired in Anger. The title itself was a perfect encapsulation of its contents, a cool, analytical examination of the most heated and violent of human activities. This was not a typical war memoir filled with romanticized heroics or emotional reflections. It was something far more rare and valuable, a technical combat manual written by a master of his craft. George's writing was as precise as his shooting. He dissected his engagements with the Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal, not to boast of his own prowess, but to illustrate tactical principles. He analyzed the enemy's equipment with the detached curiosity of an engineer, detailing the strengths and weaknesses of the Arisaka rifle, its optics, and the ammunition it used. He offered Frank practical advice on jungle warfare, on camouflage, on the psychology of stalking an enemy, and on the vital importance of patience and observation. Shots Fired in Anger was unique because it bridged the gap between the theoretical world of firearms development and the brutal reality of their use in combat. George could speak with equal authority on the ballistic coefficient of a bullet and on the feeling of lining up a shot on a human target. He offered an unflinching look at the tools of war, treating them not as talismans of power, but as instruments that had to be understood and mastered. The book quickly found an audience far beyond casual military history buffs. It was studied by professional soldiers, by arms designers, and by civilian marksmen. It became a foundational text for future generations of snipers, providing them with a direct link to the hard-won knowledge of one of America's first modern masters of the art. In its pages, the ghost of Guadalcanal and the lessons of the Burma Trail were preserved, ensuring that the knowledge George had gained would not die with his generation. His legacy, therefore, was twofold. He was a war hero whose actions had saved lives and changed doctrine on the battlefield. But he was also a teacher whose carefully chosen words would continue to instruct soldiers and marksmen for decades to come, long after the echoes of his own shots had faded into history. The enduring legacy of John George is not simply a story of one man and his rifle, but a powerful illustration of a recurring theme in military history: the tension between established doctrine and individual innovation. Armies, by their very nature, are conservative institutions. They rely on standardization, on mass-produced equipment, and on tactics that can be taught to millions of soldiers. This approach creates the mighty, uniform machine capable of waging industrial-scale warfare. Yet war is an ever-changing and unpredictable affair. It constantly presents new problems in new environments, challenges that the standard doctrine is often ill-equipped to handle. On Guadalcanal, the U.S. Army's doctrine of massed semi-automatic rifle fire, so effective in theory, was being systematically dismantled by an older, seemingly simpler form of warfare practiced by the Japanese snipers. They were waging a psychological war that firepower alone could not win. Into this rigid, doctrinal world stepped an innovator. George's Winchester Model 70 was the physical embodiment of a different way of thinking. It represented precision over volume, patience over aggression, and the idea that a single, intelligent actor could, under the right circumstances, be more effective than a blunt instrument of force. The initial dismissal of his rifle as a toy by his superiors was not born of malice, but of a doctrinal mindset. In their worldview, there was no place for such a specialized, non-standard piece of equipment. It was an anomaly, an interruption to the uniformity they relied upon. The 4-day duel at Point Cruz was therefore more than a tactical engagement. It was a field test of a radical hypothesis. The hypothesis was that the future of infantry combat would need to make room for the specialist, for the one-shot warrior who could achieve strategic effects through surgical application of skill. George's victory was so decisive, so unambiguous, that it shattered the existing paradigm. It forced the command structure, from Captain Morris all the way to Colonel Ferry, to confront the limitations of their own thinking. The creation of the sniper section was a monumental moment. It was the institution of the Army officially admitting that the innovator was right. It was the system adapting, absorbing the lesson that the individual had taught it. The decision to equip this new unit with Springfield rifles and unertl scopes was the industrial machine attempting to replicate the success of the artisan. They were trying to mass-produce the very capability they had initially dismissed. This story is a microcosm of a larger process of wartime evolution. It mirrors the way British commandos developed new raiding tactics, or how German panzer commanders pioneered the concept of the blitzkrieg. In each case, established norms were challenged by individuals who saw a better way, and their success forced a painful but necessary evolution in military thinking. George's later experience with Merrill's Marauders adds a crucial nuance to this lesson. It demonstrates that innovation is context-dependent. The sniper's art, so decisive in the static defense of Guadalcanal, was less relevant in the fluid, fast-moving ambushes of the Burma campaign. This does not invalidate the innovation, but rather refines our understanding of it. There is no single master weapon or master tactic for all situations. True military genius lies in the ability to recognize which tool is right for which job. John George's story endures because it speaks to the power of the individual to change the course of events, not through grand speeches or high command, but through the quiet mastery of a difficult and deadly craft. He proved that sometimes the most powerful force on the battlefield is not the biggest explosion, but the clearest idea. To truly understand the significance of John George's achievement, we must look not only at his actions, but at the tools he used and those of his adversaries. The confrontation on Guadalcanal was a duel of technologies and philosophies as much as it was a duel between men. George's weapon, the Winchester Model 70, was the pinnacle of American civilian rifle manufacturing. Introduced in 1936, it was often called the rifleman's rifle. It was renowned for its controlled feed action, a design feature that ensured exceptional reliability, and for its crisp, adjustable trigger. Most importantly, it was built from the ground up for accuracy, with a free-floated barrel that allowed it to vibrate consistently from shot to shot. It was a rifle designed for sportsmen who demanded the utmost precision, where the difference of a single inch at hundreds of yards mattered. Paired with this rifle was the Lyman Alaskan scope. This was not a crude, fragile optic. It was a robust, weatherproof scope designed for hunting in the harshest conditions, from the mountains of Alaska to the swamps of Louisiana. Its key advantage was its light-gathering ability. The quality of its lenses allowed it to produce a bright, clear sight picture even in the dim, dappled light of dawn and dusk, or in the perpetual twilight under a jungle canopy. This combination of a mechanically superb rifle and a brilliant optical sight gave George a decisive technological edge. Now consider the weapon of his opponents, the Japanese Arisaka. The Type 97 or 98 sniper rifles were military-issue weapons, adaptations of the standard infantry rifle. While rugged and reliable, they were not built with the same fanatical devotion to precision as the Winchester. Their optics were generally of lower quality, with less light-gathering power and a narrower field of view. In the shadowy confines of the jungle, this optical inferiority was a critical weakness. George could see them when they could not see him. He could distinguish a camouflaged sniper from a harmless shadow, while to them he remained just another part of the incomprehensible green wall. But the Japanese snipers had a different kind of advantage, one that was not technological, but philosophical and physiological. They were masters of patience, trained in a warrior culture that valued extreme endurance and self-sacrifice. The act of lashing themselves into a treetop for days on end, enduring insects, thirst, and the terror of discovery, was a feat of mental and physical fortitude that few Western soldiers could comprehend. They sought to become one with the jungle, to subordinate their own existence to the mission. Their greatest weapon was their near-superhuman ability to remain still and unseen. This is what makes the duel at Point Cruz so fascinating. It was the ultimate test of two different approaches to warfare. On one side, American technological superiority, embodied by a precision rifle and advanced optics, wielded by a man who was a master of the science of ballistics. On the other side, Japanese doctrinal discipline, embodied by men who had turned themselves into living extensions of the landscape, masters of the art of concealment. In the end, technology and the scientific application of marksmanship triumphed. George's ability to see into the shadows, to analyze the battlefield from a distance, and to deliver a single, devastatingly accurate shot from a stable, precise platform proved to be the key that unlocked the Japanese advantage. He defeated their greatest strength, their invisibility, by using a tool that allowed him to see what was meant to be hidden. The rifle, now resting in the National Firearms Museum in Virginia, is more than just a historical artifact. It is a testament to the idea that in warfare, the right technology, placed in the hands of a true expert, can overcome even the most formidable human adversary. The story of John George and his Winchester rifle resonates so deeply because it operates on a fundamentally human scale. In the vast, impersonal chronicle of World War II, A conflict defined by armies numbered in the millions and casualties counted in the tens of millions, his actions stand out as a stark reminder of the power of individual agency. It is a modern retelling of an ancient archetype, the lone champion, the skilled David facing a seemingly insurmountable Goliath. This narrative cuts through the overwhelming statistics and grand strategies to connect with us on a personal level. We can comprehend the story of one man, his specific tool, and his defined mission in a way that we cannot truly grasp the complexities of an entire front. George's initial struggle was not just against the enemy, but against the skepticism of his own side. His superiors and peers, locked into a conventional mindset, saw his rifle as a toy. This detail is crucial. It frames his story as one of vindication, of a lone expert proving his worth against the ignorance of the establishment. It's a powerful and relatable theme, the triumph of specialized knowledge over bureaucratic inertia. Every person who has ever had a good idea dismissed by a skeptical boss or a conformist group can find a piece of themselves in George's story. When he succeeds, it is not just a military victory, but a moral one. Furthermore, his duel with the 11 snipers transforms the chaotic, anonymous violence of war into a focused, understandable drama. It is not a random battle, but a methodical hunt, a series of one-on-one confrontations where skill, patience, and intelligence are the deciding factors. The narrative has a clear beginning, a tense middle, and a decisive end. This structure makes the story compelling and memorable. We are not just told that he was a good shot. We are shown through the deliberate process of him outwitting and outshooting his opponents, exactly how his expertise translated into victory. The rifle itself becomes a character in this drama. It is not just another M1 Garand, indistinguishable from millions of others. It is his rifle, the Winchester Model 70. He bought with his own money, the tool he understood intimately. This connection between the craftsman and his tool adds a layer of personality and romance to the story. The rifle is an extension of his will, a symbol of the individualistic American spirit standing against the mass-produced machinery of war. Finally, George's legacy as an author, with shots fired in anger, cements his place in history. It ensures that his story is not merely an anecdote passed down through generations of soldiers, but a documented, analytical account. He becomes not just a warrior, but a teacher. This act of writing, of translating visceral experience into transmissible knowledge, elevates him beyond the battlefield. It completes the narrative arc. The innovator proves his theory, achieves victory, and then codifies his knowledge for the benefit of all who follow. In a war of faceless masses, John George's story is a testament to the enduring power of the individual. It is a tale of expertise, patience, and the profound impact one person can have when they possess the right skills, the right tool, and the courage to challenge the conventions of their time. His quiet 4-day war in the trees of Guadalcanal remains one of the most potent and inspiring legends of the entire conflict.